Welcome to the Stop Suffering in Silence podcast with your host, Denise Walsh and Rachel Timothy.
All right. Welcome back, friends, to Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh. I'm a clinical psychologist turned dream life coach, and I'm here with co-host Rachel Timothy. And we have a super special guest today. He is on the cutting edge of mindset research, consulting. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders primarily through a focus on mindset. He loves connecting the healing journey with leadership development. And to be honest, he speaks my language. As a clinical psychologist turned leader and entrepreneur, I feel like half of my goal is to help people become better and heal from the inside out so they can live their dream life and thrive in the business world. And so when Ryan, I'm on his email list, which we'll link below because everyone should join. He sent out a blog that was called How Past Trauma Affects Leadership Quality. And I thought we need to talk more about this because he shares not only how it impacts leadership, but how it impacts survivors neurologically, which then impacts everything. So big Stop SIS welcome to Ryan Gottfredson.
Hey, thanks for having me, and thank you for creating this space where people can have these types of conversations. I think all of us are on our own healing journey, and we know that over 70% of people have experienced trauma to the degree that it has altered our body's nervous system. And one of the things I found in my own journey is that healing really doesn't occur until we kind of label that we've experienced trauma. And so thank you for creating a space for people to have the courage to put that label on some of the experiences that we've had.
Yeah, it's like making sense of something that doesn't make any sense. It's a journey, that's for sure. So I'd love to hear, before we jump into the article and really focus on the neurological effects trauma has on the body, tell us a little bit about your story and how and why this was a topic you decided to jump in on.
Yeah, we could talk in the next 45 minutes just on this. No, we'll keep it short. So I have always been passionate about figuring out how to become better for myself, because I want to become better. And I also want to be able to help other people to become better. And so I did a PhD at Indiana University in organizational behavior and human resources, bringing in kind of the psychology into the business world. I mean, the way that I think about it is like, I was kind of like, I want to be a sports psychologist, but for leaders in businesses. And that's kind of what I've been able to do. And in the process of trying to figure out how we become better, I have come to a deep understanding about the power of mindsets, the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we view the world around us. And so what I've learned is that people, for example, we could have two different people who see the same exact thing and they respond to that thing very differently. Well, what determines the difference? Well, that's our mindsets. So I know the power of mindsets, but what I didn't first understand when I first learned about mindsets was, where do our mindsets come from? And so I've kind of been on a journey to try to figure out, where do they come from? I've come to learn that our mindsets are actually neurological connections in our brain. They're actually the most foundational aspect of everything that we do. And I've come to learn, as I started to kind of dive into this, is that trauma is something that impacts our mindsets. And it actually alters our body's nervous system. And so that when we experience trauma, naturally our body becomes more wired for self-protection. That makes sense, right? Our body's nervous system is awesome. It's designed to keep us alive. So when we experience trauma, it wires us for self-protection that causes us to see things through a self-protective lens. And while that protects us in the moment and from future trauma, that's the purpose, it holds us back from creating value in the world around us. And so what I've discovered is that most leaders I work with have a trauma history, and that wires them for self-protection, and that shows up in their leadership that negatively impacts their influence on the people that they lead. And it really isn't until we go through the healing journey that we can shift our mindsets and operate in a manner in which we could create greater value in our world.
And now we're done. That's perfect. Yeah. Just kidding. Yeah, you're right. It's like the deeper work. Like we can say all the things that we want, but when we heal neurologically, we're actually getting it at the root, and the mindsets form out of a new root, which will be much healthier down the line.
Well, I don't know about you what you experience as a coach, but in my world, when I'm working with leaders, and I don't think this is just leaders, but they essentially come to me and they say, just tell me what to do and I will go and do it. And I'm like, I can tell you what to do, but is your body actually capable of doing the things that I'm going to tell you to? And that's the rub right there, is because there's really two different types of development. There's what is called horizontal development. This is improving our knowledge, talents, and skills. And that's what leaders are really asking for. Like, give me an app I could download onto my operating system. But the question is your operating system even capable of using that app in its current condition, right? And so there's another form of development, which is called vertical development, which is all about upgrading our internal operating system. And that's where the healing journey exists. I mean, the reality is that we cannot upgrade our internal operating system until we heal our body's nervous system. And the process of healing is what helps us to elevate on that vertical dimension, elevating our vertical altitude there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so understanding how trauma impacts the nervous system allows us to then work to say, all right, well, how can we heal that so we don't live in fight or flight mode all of the time, or have these self-protective mechanisms that may have served us at one point, but now are no longer serving us. And we can heal through that so we can dream again and live a life we love.
I would say like an interesting example of this is me recently. I'm in the process of going to court against those who trafficked me as a kid, and just preparing for all of that. I mentally maybe know now, and that's taken years, that I'm not going to be hurt by going to court. I'm going to be safe. Everything will be fine. But I can tell you, I still get sick to my stomach. I feel like I can't breathe, or that I'm breathing underwater and my heart races. Like my whole body reacts to the thought of doing this, even though mentally I'm saying, I know I'm going to be fine. And I feel like that's exactly what this is.
Yeah. The very fact that you could connect to that, right, just means that suggests a certain level of healing. Because again, it's not until we could kind of put labels to that, connect with that we can actually do something about it. At least that's been my experience. I don't know how you feel about it, Rachel.
Well, I feel like I'm growing every day with it because I can now recognize it. Before, it was just survival.
Yeah. Before it was like, this is how I feel, so this is how I be. This is how my body feels, so this must be true. And now you're able to kind of separate yourself and say, this is what I'm thinking. Let's evaluate it. And then you're even able to say, this is how my body's feeling. Let's evaluate it. And because of that, you can move through it much faster.
Yeah. And I'm sure each time that I do that, my body will get used to the fact that this isn't dangerous. I can calm down because we've done this several times and you've been safe, Yeah.
So let's dive into the neurological effects that trauma has on our body. And the first one that you mention is disassociation. And so I'll let you explain and share that, and then I'll let Rachel respond.
Well, so here's one of my recent learnings that I found so what we need to understand is our body has our nervous system is a really effective stress response system, right? Our body is designed to absorb stress in a healthy way so that we can navigate life, right? So when we, are one of my most favorite hikes, I don't know if either of you have ever been to Zion's National Park in southern Utah, and there's a hike called Angel's Landing. It's one of my favorite hikes. And you get to this point where it's about 20 feet across and then sheer cliffs on both sides, like thousands of feet down. And even just me saying this, like my palms are getting sweaty, like my heart starts to race, like that's part of the fun for me. And my body likes that, right? The stress system is kicking in and it's designed to protect us. So we have a stress response system. But what we've got to realize is our body's stress response system is only capable of taking on only so much stress. And everybody's stress tolerance level is different. And whenever we find ourselves in a situation where the stress of the situation exceeds our body's capacity to deal with that stress, our nervous system has to take rather drastic measures to protect us in those situations. These are drastic measures. It doesn't normally take these measures, but when the stress is severe enough, it will take these measures. And what research has found is that our body typically responds, our nervous system typically responds in two different ways. There's two different common adaptations as a result of this exceeding stress. The first adaptation is what's called hypervigilance. So this is when our salience network, so in our mind, we've got three networks that control how we operate. There's the salience network that's in control of our emotions. There's the default mode network that's in control of our non-conscious processing. And then there's our central executive network, which is in control of our conscious processing. So when we experience trauma and the neurological adaptation that leads to hypervigilance occurs, what is going on in our brain is the salience network becomes really strong and the default mode network isn't able to step in and regulate that salience network. So that means our emotions will have a tendency to run rampant and we aren't able to kind of block those in. Like, let me give you just a really quick, relatively minor example. So my wife was traumatized as a 3-year-old because she has two mean older brothers who made her watch the movie It when she was 3. So she is now deathly afraid of clowns, right? So like her brothers are still mean and will occasionally send her a text message of a scary looking clown. And literally my wife will like drop the phone and she'll like scream. Like it's just a knee-jerk reaction because what's going on here is the salience network is firing right away. And the default mode network isn't able to step in and say, hey, my wife's name is Jenna. Hey, Jenna, don't you just realize that this is a picture of a clown? It's not even a real clown. It's a picture of a clown and it's on your phone and it can't hurt you, right? Mm-hmm. This is a situation where just the body's natural reaction is where the salience network is overactive and the default mode network struggles to come in and regulate. So I'll pause there, but that's the first most common adaptation as a result of exceeding stress or stress that exceeds our body's capacity to deal with it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I was going to mention, I like the word knee jerk because it's like you're not consciously choosing to react that way, but your body is reacting that way because of past experiences.
Yeah, spot on. The other adaptation is actually the opposite of that. The default mode network becomes so strong that it overregulates the salience network and doesn't allow the salience network to come online. This is called dissociation. So this is when our nervous system has decided the way that you're going to survive the pain that you've been through is to just simply not feel it, right? That we're cutting it off. This is essentially, there ends up effectively being a disconnect between our mind and our body. And these two adaptations are long lasting. These will exist until we go through the process of healing them. And therefore we can improve. So that's the second adaptation is dissociation, where we're effectively disconnecting ourselves from our feelings.
Yes.
You want to share any of your experiences, Rachel? Because there's been times when it's so annoying, but then there's also times where you're like, this is what saved me.
Right. Yeah. So can I ask, with hypervigilance, is that when, like, let's say I go into an area that's extremely crowded and like my nervous system will feel that. And so I could tell you every person that, like, I remember their face. I know who's right next to me. Is that hypervigilance?
Yes. And it's like, I've got I'll just say it's a family member. It's kind of a distant family member. And she's kind of a thorn in everybody's side because, like, when we invite her to a family party, she gets offended because other members of the family she doesn't like gets invited as well. And then when we don't invite her, she also gets offended. And it's like, we can't do anything but offend you, apparently, right? It's because she is looking, she's on the hunt for any indication that we are slighting her, right? She doesn't allow any sort of grace or forgiveness. So that's an example. And to your point, if you're in a party, like particularly, let's say you're in a party and there might be two Rachels in the room, and somebody says Rachel across the room, and you're like, bam, what are they saying about me? Right? That's that knee-jerk, hyper-vigilant reaction. And it could have been nothing about you, right? Because there's another Rachel that you didn't know about, but that's where your mind will automatically go.
Yep. I know for me, like I watch facial expressions, I watch eyes a lot just to try to pick up on if somebody's dangerous or not. And so that's where my hypervigilance goes. And then I guess a question I have with the dissociation part. So I know that I went to that spot where I didn't feel the pain and I didn't have conscious awareness of it. And, and my body obviously stored that somewhere for me to remember whenever it thought I was ready. But there are times now when I get into I could be triggered or I could be reminded of a memory, and I will go so deep into that memory. I am not present with you. I am reliving that memory in almost like a dissociative flashback.
I'm no medical doctor, but everything I've read about PTSD is that's like a key PTSD symptom is that type of experience. And I think, and there's people who I've read about who have had really traumatic experience, and they almost say it was kind of like an out of body experience for me. I almost viewed myself being traumatized. I didn't necessarily feel it because they had disassociated their self so much. And that's, to your point, it's a pure self-preservation mechanism that's the extreme lengths our body will go to
which is incredible.
Survive. Yeah.
It is absolutely incredible.
We know several. I'll just share a story I know of a girl who didn't disassociate during her trauma, and she felt everything. And she now lives in a mental institution because she cannot function. And so in hearing her story, we were like, what's the difference between Rachel's experience and her experience? And we wondered, is it the disassociation? And because of that, Rachel was able to kind of compartmentalize and live a life and, have a family. And then, whereas this girl, it was so woven within her normal she didn't separate it. She was embodying that trauma every day.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to make sense to me, which is, at the same time, super sad.
Well, and maybe she went into hypervigilance all the time, right? Yeah. So whereas you, Rachel, experienced both, she, from what I remember of her story, lives in hypervigilance every day, all day, and hasn't had a chance to. So her nervous system is wired that way as of now. Change is possible, but another consequence or another adaptation, yes, that trauma has on the nervous system is disintegration. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So what's going on, and this is kind of where, and we've really already kind of covered this idea, is this, we do have these three brain networks, or these networks in our brain that are controlling how we interact with our world, how our brain processes our world. So again, that's the salience network, our default mode network, and the central executive network. And so what's ended up happening is when we experience trauma, if we have a healthy neurological system, these brain networks work effectively together. They regulate each other. So trauma disrupts that, how they work together. And that's effectively what disintegration is. I don't know if it's of interest to you, but one of my recent learnings has been, I've been diving into the role that ADHD plays in how these brain networks work. And so trauma is something that, is clearly we're going to call it a nurture thing that changes the functionality of these brain networks. ADHD is largely seen as a nature thing, and it similarly impacts these brain networks. But how ADHD affects these brain networks is it actually reduces or weakens the connection between these brain networks, so they have a harder time working together. So what's interesting to me is at a neurological level, there's not a whole lot of difference between ADHD and trauma. And we even see similar impacts in terms of how people operate. If somebody's got ADHD, they actually operate fairly similar to somebody who's been through significant trauma. Now, the experience is very different. I'm not going to undermine the experience, but at a neurological level, there's a lot of similarities.
So it's kind of like offline a little bit. So is the goal to have the default mode network the one in charge most of the time? Or is that like the central one and the other ones are situational? Yeah,
so actually the salience network, the home of our emotions, that actually serves as the communications hub in this network. So one of the jobs of the salience network is to turn on the default mode network and turn it off when it wants to shift to the central executive network. So the salience network is kind of control of that back and forth process. So whenever the central executive network isn't on, the default mode network is on. So as a whole, and it just speaks to, we want these networks to work effectively together so that they can regulate in an effective way, so that we don't move into self-protection mode when we don't have to be there, right? That's kind of when people are carrying, or you hear the term carrying around trauma, what's going on is, as you kind of articulated, Rachel, like if I'm going to court, I know I'm going to be safe, but I still don't feel safe, right? Mm-hmm. That's what's kind of, that's the struggle, is when I should feel safe and I don't feel safe. That's what makes it difficult to navigate in our world in a really healthy way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say for me to go out and get a regular job, it would be very difficult for me still at this point, just because of those moments where I don't feel safe and I don't even 100% always know, okay, this is my logical thinking or this is my emotional thinking. And it completely disrupts me as a human and the things that I want to do.
Yeah. So even if we were to keep going down kind of my blog post, the next kind of domino that falls, if you will, on these neurological adaptations is what we're talking about is what's called misencoding. We start to see safe things as dangerous and even dangerous things as safe.
Which is why one of the things we talk about in our programs is you often see trauma survivors have repeat trauma with different perpetrators, domestic violence situation after domestic violence situation coming from with an abusive father situation and that kind of thing. And I think this speaks to that.
Yeah. And you think about like drug use, right? I mean, drug use it's not safe, but it's seen as safe, partly because it's a release from the pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So misencoding, things are offline a bit. And so I would, like in the dream life language, I would say that then this becomes your normal. This neurological pattern becomes normal. And so peace feels weird. Peace feels unsafe. Mm-hmm. In fact, fight or flight mode, multitasking, running on all cylinders, or depression, or not feeling safe. All of these things can become our neurological normal. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of default to that unless we work to we can realign those neural pathways. But misencoding seems like it's a hardwiring of, and then we just default back to it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that felt really profound. The idea that people who have been traumatized, when they experience peace, it doesn't feel comfortable or right to them.
And I wonder if it's, when is the other shoe going to drop? It's immediately going into what bad's going to happen.
Yeah. And that's what, as you say that, my mind immediately goes, if anybody's read any of Brene Brown's stuff, she talks a lot about that. It's like, even for herself. And that's what I love about like Brene Brown and, reading from others' experiences. She has her own trauma past, and she's very transparent about how it shows up. And that's one of the ways that she's verbalized that is she can never be like, sit with happiness, because it's then if I'm happy, what's now going to happen? And that's, not a healthy, that's not healthy. That's not normal. But for people who have been through trauma, that just feels natural. It feels normal. It feels right.
Yeah. We'll have ladies say, everything's fine. I'm totally fine. But the house is on fire, because
we'll have people say the house is on fire and everything's fine.
True. So, okay. So we're going to talk about getting back online and healing the nervous system in a minute. But another response that trauma has on the nervous system is this shrinking window of tolerance. And I think this is really fascinating when we talk about the idea of being triggered and, being in a crowd and having your body respond in a way that's hopefully you are safe, right? So that your body's response isn't helpful in that moment. But tell us a little bit about the shrinking window of tolerance.
Yeah, and this overlaps quite heavily with the hypervigilance, right? The more hypervigilant we are, with the more narrow window of tolerance. So the concept of window of tolerance is if you aren't familiar, is the basic idea is that we have a zone that we operate within, where we operate with kind of cognitive and emotional. We are cognitively and emotionally regulated. We could think clearly. We could kind of navigate. We're not kind of feeling anxious. We're not feeling stressed. But there's things that could come up. We commonly will use the term triggered. Some episodes or things or stressors that come up that cause us to move out of our center, our healthy center in terms of our cognitions and emotions. And the further we get away from that center, the more we actually start to lose control of our cognitions and our emotions. And there's kind of seems to be a breaking point that if we go over that breaking point, we have lost it, right? We've kind of lost control of our ability to regulate ourselves in that moment. That's when we step over our window of tolerance. Generally, that's either in terms of fight and flight on one side, or it might even be freeze on the other side, hyperarousal versus hypoarousal. So when we experience trauma, our body's nervous system's job is to keep us alive and to prevent us from experiencing pain in the future. So what our nervous system does after we experience trauma is it shrinks it down, because the more narrow our window of tolerance, the more our body can activate the stress response system, even at the smallest little slight, but that sends us out of control. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like we're all going to get thrown outside of our window of tolerance. But what becomes problematic is if our window of tolerance is too narrow, then we start to get triggered and set off by things that shouldn't really trigger us or set us off. And therefore, we are operating more frequently outside of our zone of regulation. And when we're operating in that zone, we're just not navigating life, relationships, decisions. We're not navigating those very effectively.
It makes me feel like if somebody has a small window of tolerance and everything is essentially triggering, the way that somebody just doesn't feel safe. They don't feel safe in their own home, in their own body, and in the outside world. And that's a really tricky place to be, because in order to progress and live, have relationships that are healthy, we want to feel safe in those relationships and in our world. So healing the nervous system and growing that window of tolerance will also increase our self-trust and our trust with others.
Yeah, and you bring up a really great point, which is for us to make meaningful progress in the healing journey, we need to do it within a context in which we feel safe. Because if we're not, then we're consistently being kind of thrown outside of that window of tolerance. And so, safety, a context of safety is critical, a critical environment for the healing journey.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. foundational. Like it can't start really until your body is in a place where it can start to relax. So let's talk about healing the nervous system, because I think it's super fascinating for me, and hopefully everyone listening, because I just love this stuff so much. It's fascinating how our body responds to trauma, and it does so because it loves us. And we don't have to stay there. So we can heal our nervous system. We can reprogram our nervous system to be balanced. We can expand our window of tolerance to feel safe in our own home and in the world. And so how do we do that?
Well, so for me, and surely don't have all the answers, but I think we can learn some things from understanding kind of connecting trauma to our body's nervous system in these three brain networks. So when we understand the effects that trauma has on our nervous system, we kind of now know, oh, that's what I need to repair, right? If my salience network is super overactive and my default mode network isn't coming online, well, I need to create balance there. Or the other way, if I've got dissociation, my default mode network is just always overregulating my salience network. Well, now that's kind of what I need to fix. And really what we understand, or at least to my knowledge, is that the process of whether we're more hypervigilant or dissociated, or we have some combination of the two, the process seems to be kind of the same, regardless of these adaptations. And the way that it helps me to think about it is to think of almost our body in terms of its vertical, like as I'm standing right now. Think about it vertically, and our nervous system exists from our mind all the way down to our toes, and it runs up and down. So there are a variety of trauma healing techniques, processes, systems that, and they are largely will follow either a top-down process, starting in our mind, moving into our emotions and down into our feelings, or a bottom up, where we start in our feelings, move into our emotions, and then into our cognitions. And this process of moving, kind of engaging in exercises that are moving up and down in our nervous system, seems to facilitate the healing process in these brain networks. And so most healing processes related to trauma can usually be categorized as either a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. My experience is that top-down is generally a little bit more surface level, and it's oftentimes can be more approachable, and it's better for people who have experienced less neurological adaptations or as a result of their trauma. What I've seemed to have learned is that the bottom-up approaches are really necessary for people who have experienced significant trauma. So let's maybe dive into what some of these are.
Give us some examples.
But does that make sense, at least on that level, or anything to add?
When you say, I think I just want some examples. So when you say top down, do you mean, for example, I've recently heard like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, is less effective for trauma because it doesn't heal the nervous system. It may give you more positive thinking in the moment, but your body still feels, and like Rachel said, we can know all the things, but if our body's still reacting, that still impacts us. Whereas a bottom-up approach would be really, and again, this is where we'll get some examples, is healing the nervous system, and then the thoughts follow potentially.
Yeah, so you're spot on. So cognitive behavioral therapy, as I think, is the typical top-down therapy approach that's used in kind of the healing process. And I wouldn't say that it doesn't heal the body's nervous system. I just think it has, a trauma survivor is limited in their ability to cognate about the things that they've experienced. So oftentimes I'm not going to say it's never helpful, but sometimes doing that cognition process could be very difficult for somebody who actually extremely dissociated and almost kind of blocked it out altogether, right? So it's hard to do that. So I think that's one of the reasons why I say the top down is oftentimes a little bit limited. and
Would that be
generally
like
better
talk
for
therapy too? Talk therapy would
talk
be maybe
therapy.
considered top
Yeah.
down. Okay.
Yep. So those are some examples. So, and then some bottom up examples are things like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I would classify as a bottom up approach. So if you're not familiar, usually you need a trained therapist, and they engage in bilateral stimulation. So you're actually moving side to side, like either taps on your shoulders or beeps in your ear, or your eyes going back and forth. And actually what research has found is this bilateral stimulation actually lowers one's walls in terms of their nervous system, that allows them to step into trauma without being reactivated by that stepping into that past trauma, which then allows them to process it more effectively. So that's eye movement desensitization, right? We're desensitizing ourselves to trauma and reprocessing it in a more effective way. So that's EMDR. Another one is internal family systems therapy, which when I first started working with my trauma therapist, I was doing it to do EMDR, and she started to do internal family systems work with me, and I had no clue what it was. And if she would have told me, I'm going to do internal family systems therapy with you, I probably would have said, no, that sounds crazy. But
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot, like I just told Rachel, I've heard about it like at least 3 times this last month. But I have not read the book, but would you consider it being like inner child work?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway.
Anyway.
Yeah, the idea is that we have had pivotal experiences in our lives that have caused us to actually create different versions of ourselves, parts of ourselves. And these parts of ourselves actually live in our bodies in different places, and they play specific roles. And the process is actually coming to realize these parts. So what's crazy, like for me, I had just quickly a little bit about my own trauma past. As you would have asked me 5 years ago if I had trauma in my past, I would have said no. Like, I had a great childhood. My parents stayed together. I was never abused. I always had the things that I needed, which all those things are true. But what I came to learn is that while my parents were always there for me physically, they were never there for me emotionally. So there is a couple of episodes when I was little, one when I was 5, where my parents had this big blow up fight. And I remember being so scared as a 5-year-old. And my parents never comforted me after that. So as a 5-year-old, I'm dealing with some really big emotions, and I've got my body's trying to figure out how to deal with it. And that's where my dissociation started, was when I was 5. And then when I was 10, I lost a brother-in-law who was like a brother to me. And I remember crying on the couch for hours, and my parents never came and sat by me. They never gave me a hug, right? So those are a couple of what I've discovered were a couple of really pivotal moments in my past that now when I do internal family systems therapy, I actually go and do the work of connecting with my 5-year-old self, connecting with my 10-year-old self. I even found that I've got like a 17-year-old version of myself who serves as my protector. He kind of lives over my left shoulder up above my heart. And whenever, I'm, if there's ever a need for me to like step in and get defensive, that's the part of me that comes out. So anyways, we've all got these different parts. They exist for us differently. And I went through the process, and I was like, I can't believe I'm actually finding these parts, and I'm feeling them, and I'm feeling their emotions. I'm feeling their past experience. And so in internal family systems therapy, people with trauma, usually they have, I just had the word for it in my mind. And what's usually called an exile. This is a younger version of ourselves that has been hurt, that we're keeping protected. And oftentimes we're probably not giving that exile the attention it really needs for us to heal. So that's just another example of us stepping into the feelings first, and then kind of bringing it up into our cognitions. Other examples, like even surface level, are a lot of people who have experienced trauma. They have a hard time connecting with people. And so like equine therapy is a form of therapy, because it helps them to kind of, in the process of taking care of a horse, It allows them to connect with another being, kind of try to engage in, as they are taking care of a horse, what are the feelings that are coming up in their body, right? So like, if you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, for example, there's examples of people who have experienced so much trauma and are so dissociated that you can put something in their hand and they could close their eyes and they couldn't actually tell you what's in their hand. Like if it's a key or a paper clip, they're that dissociated. So the idea of like petting a horse helps them to start to reconnect to some of those feelings.
Yes. So I have some pretty cool equine therapy stories. They're actually in my book if you get a chance to read it. But one of the things I found with it is the horse picks up on your emotions sometimes before you do. Like, what the heck? Like, I mean, it's funny because the horse would basically tell the equine therapist, like, this is BS. What she's saying does not match what she's feeling. And there's no hiding it from the horse. So it was really powerful.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because my wife has done equine therapy, and she's got some older brothers. Yeah, they've caused some trauma, but there's also a dynamic there that exists from a family dynamic. And one of the things is she was actually working with a therapist to kind of, how do I best set boundaries like with my brothers? Because I want to love them, but I also at the same time I need to stay healthy. What the horse ended up doing is engaging in behaviors similar to what her brothers would engage in.
I don't doubt it.
The horse would come up and kind of bump her, and then my wife would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I got in your way." And the therapist is like, "Why are you apologizing for that, crappy horse who just ran into you?" Like, so it allowed her to kind of reprocess step into that experience. And then kind of think, oh, I need to think about this and manage that situation differently. So horses are just, uncanny in their ability to kind of help in that healing process.
I love what you said too about labeling the situation, labeling like, oh my gosh, this was trauma, this was abuse, because there's so much mental manipulation that happens that it's so confusing. We don't even know what happened. And so labeling the experience, but also we found in the healing journey, labeling the emotions. What do I feel? How am I? And helps us to reconnect with our body. Grounding techniques, what are the five senses? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? Kind of brings us back into our body, which allows for that increased regulation where you're kind of getting your body back online. Journaling can help with that too. Like, what am I feeling right now? Like brain dumping everything, no censorship, right? Burn it after if you need to. But really allowing yourself to hear from your body and hear from your emotions and hear from yourself. So then you can evaluate it and switch things cognitively and pro and con and what's helpful right now and what is true and all the things that we can do to evaluate what's helpful today. Getting reconnected to what we're feeling and experiencing seems to be important.
For sure. I think one of the ways that I heard it recently that I like the idea of is we can't fix anything that we don't shed light on. And labeling allows us to shed light on it, right? Whether we're labeling it trauma or the emotions. But let me give you just a quick personal example. About 6 months ago, we bought a new house and we moved, and we literally moved 3 miles down the road, like not very far. But after we moved into the new house, I was in a funk for over a month. Like I just felt off. I kind of was like, am I depressed? Like I was, and I was kind of sick of feeling this way. And I started just Googling, like, do people feel bad after they move? Like, and there was a word that popped up or website that essentially said, it is common for people to grieve after they move. They're grieving just the norms, the day-to-day activities that they engage in one environment. And when they move, they might grieve. And as soon as I put that label on it, grieving, I was like, oh my goodness, that's what my body is doing. And literally the next day I woke up not in a funk. And I don't feel like I've been in a funk since. So it was just putting that label on it seemed to do the trick.
We have a girl currently in our 90-day U-turn who battles with body dysmorphia. and for the first time figured out where it came from. And since then, she's like, it's life-changing. Just simply knowing why I have it.
Yeah.
Changed everything.
I have a quick story too. When I was starting in clinical psychology world, I was working at a local community mental health. I'm 24 years old. I'm off to change the world, you know. And I'm
Look at you. You are. So good work.
and I was working in a whole new world of mental health and suicidation and addiction and abuse and like clients in and out of jail. And I mean, I was like a whole world I didn't know existed. I was thrust into, and I was feeling it. I was anxious, my heart, all these things. And so I scheduled an appointment with a counselor, and I was like, what is going on? And he goes, it's secondary PTSD. Stop drinking coffee for a bit. And I was like, oh, there's a reason. It kind of makes sense. And after that, it was so much better because I knew what I was feeling and why. And so understanding this is the way the body works, and this is how trauma impacts it. This is like your body doing its job. Labeling that help. It just is. It's super helpful. And then you can do something about it.
Yeah.
Rachel, what have you found? Because you have absolutely worked to retrain your nervous system over the past few years. What has worked for you?
So I will say the work of the deep breathing that I thought was absolutely stupid was one of those things that once I finally did it and hit that like vagus nerve or whatever, that's something that helps comfort me and helps bring my perspective back to the present. But just different things like that I literally thought everybody was stupid and telling me to do in the moment. I'm like, you guys don't understand how severe my case is. Your little tricks are not going to work. Oh my goodness, it works. So, even just keeping yourself grounded with sticking your hand in a ice cubes or singing worship music or all those different things. It helps shift something on the inside to where you can get back in control.
One thing we focus on in 90-Day U-Turn is not the trauma. We really work to say, like, what do we want life to look like? And let's make that bigger than the fear that we're, so there's two ways of thinking about it. I can talk about the fear and talk about how I want it to go away and talk about how I want to decrease it. And guess what? It makes it bigger. So instead, we focus on what it is that we want and what does it look like to feel safe and be healthy and we make that bigger. And I find that as we move that attention to what we want life to look like, our nervous system comes down and our thought patterns start to shift and our identity and it shifts with it. All right. Well, Ryan, is there anything else that's brewing up for you that you want to be sure we end with? I'm going to put your blog and website in the description. You've got lots of books behind you. Which one would you recommend to us, and how can people connect with you?
Oh, man. Well, I've got lots of books beyond my own that I would recommend related to this trauma journey. So maybe I'll throw some of these out there. I think the most approachable book on trauma. So if somebody has not read anything on trauma, but is inclined to do so, the most approachable book to me is What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. I think they do a great job with that book. I think if we wanted to dive deeper, there's The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. There's another book called The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke-Harris that I really like, and the role that trauma plays in our health and well-being. There's some deeper kind of just memoir books that I really like. One is called What My Bones Know, and that's dealing with complex PTSD. It's a heavy book, but it's a really good one. Another one that I love is called The Choice by Edith Eger. She is a Holocaust survivor. And she actually, she let her kind of trauma dictate her life up until kind of middle age. And then she got connected to Viktor Frankl. and he helped her change her life and is kind of like taken on his work. So hearing her talk about her journey is really cool. So she's got a couple of books. The Choice is the one out of the two that I like the best, but both of them are really good. So those are some trauma books that I think, if you're listening, want to dive into this further, those are the ones that I would recommend.
Awesome. And then what about yours? Which one of yours would you recommend?
Well, the most approachable one is Success Mindsets. It's all about mindsets, kind of helping us to awaken. Again, we're shedding light. We all have mindsets. We just need to shed light on them before we can do something about them. So that's what the whole purpose of the book is, helping people shed light on their current mindsets and how they can shift their mindsets. And surprise, surprise, shifting our mindsets isn't too different than the healing process that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that's the book that I have. And I still remember you sharing about the sunglasses, putting on different sunglasses that helps you see the world differently. Rachel, is there anything you want to add before we end today?
Well, I appreciate your work a whole lot, and appreciate you being here and discussing this with us. It opens my eyes even further. So thank you.
Well, man, hey, kudos to you two for stepping into some, trauma is heavy and it hurts. And I think it gets lighter the more we talk about it, is what I've found. So thank you for creating the space for helping people to make their load a little bit lighter. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
The better we become as individuals, the more we ripple effect and impact everybody around us. And so as we continue to grow and impact and heal and strengthen ourselves, our families change, our communities change, and then our world changes. So thank you, Ryan, for all of your hard work and for just everything you've shared with us today. We'll definitely keep in touch. If you guys are interested in learning more from him, check out everything in the description. We'll put all the books that he mentioned as well as his own. This is just, it's kind of like a whole new rabbit hole has been opened. Let's go down it together. All right. Have an awesome day, you guys. Thanks for being here. Be sure to like, subscribe if you're interested in learning more about how the healing journey can impact you and those around us. We're here doing this together. We're not suffering in silence. We're healing in community. Have an awesome day, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your event, workshop, school, church, or organization, then please email racheltimothy.stopsis@gmail.com. If you are interested in donating to the Stop SIS ministry, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below. Or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence or you know somebody who is, then check out our website, stopsuffering.org, to learn more about our online programs and resources. We will always recommend that you also reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.